Mom and Dad were living over Grandma Brown's house, and they called it a flat, not an apartment, but a flat. And what I remember is Mother telling me that when she was in labor, the bed fell down. It had, at that time, they didn't have box springs. They just had slats in the bed, and they were removable. And she said the bed broke down while she was in labor. We moved a lot because my mother always wanted a different house. So we moved and moved and moved. And I wish I had kept the paper that had all my moves on it, because nobody would believe how many times I've moved. When I went to kindergarten, we had a raised fish pond down there. We could go over and we had to stand on our tiptoes to be able to see the fish. And as the world went on and people got real fussy, they decided that we were probably going to drown. Now, we had to stand on our tiptoes, so we couldn't possibly fall in there. But then they decided somewhere along the line that we were all going to die when we got in the fish pond, so they put sand in it. And they had some little step stools there, and we actually could get in the sandbox and play in the sand. We had a lot of good times. We played outdoors. I can still think we played kick the can, Mother May I, and very simple games. We didn't need any sports equipment. It was just very simple stuff. And I can still remember sitting on the steps and playing stone school. And you had a stone, and the kids had to guess which hand you had it in. And if they guessed right, you were demoted. If they guessed wrong, you went up a step, because you always played that sitting on somebody's front steps. We lived in a duplex one time. Mom and Dad built a house, but they lost it during the Depression in 1929. And so we lived in a duplex. And if we took the register, and they used to have registers, wood registers, and if we took one register out, we could shake hands with the kids next door. Big thrill. Actually, I can still remember the kid. There was two kids lived there, Elaine and Al, and I called Al a dummy one day, and his mother marched over to our side of the duplex and complained bitterly because I told Al he was a dummy. I was not being very nice, but he wasn't either. The Depression didn't really affect me, even though I knew Dad was out of a job for a while. I knew that they lost their house and we moved to a duplex. But as far as any deep remembrance about it, I don't have one. Because life for me went on pretty much the same. What I also remember about that time was people didn't have refrigerators. They had ice boxes. And if you didn't empty the pan enough, you had to mop the floor. And I remember the first time we got a refrigerator. It was a gas refrigerator. And when we moved to Dodge City, Kansas, it couldn't keep up with the heat. So we had to buy a different refrigerator. But one thing I liked about living in Dodge, we'd go outdoors at night and we could see the cowboys riding the range. I can remember saying, I moved all the way out here so I could see cattle out my kitchen window. And then they built a house, and that made me mad because I couldn't see them anymore. Then I went to South High School. Well, On the Trail of the Lonesome Pine was the first Technicolor. And so that was an experience that I remember, simply because in the long run I cut school to see it. There were probably 6 or 7 of us in high school, and we all went, all girls, and we all went down to the shows together. So we had a good time while we were skipping school. But our civics teacher knew what we were doing. We did go to court first, but then we went to the movie, and the first thing he said to us when we got to civics was, "Did you like the movie?" And we said yes. What I remember most is Dad going through a red light, and he said, "Do as I say, not as I do. If you get a ticket, you are going to pay for it." He taught me how to drive. They didn't have driver's ed then, way back in the dark ages. When I was a senior in high school, he came to speak to us in an assembly one time. And I remember he said, as an example, he had a jar of nuts, and he poured water in it, and he said, "If you'll notice, the bigger ones float to the top." So he says, "My advice to you is be a big nut." I was editor of the year, we called it an annual, now they call it something else, but I don't know why she picked me for an editor. I enjoyed being editor, even though I went to JC, and one of the girls that was in my class said it was the worst yearbook she'd ever seen. Well, I was on the JC badminton, and I don't know what happened. We were doing pretty well, but all of a sudden the whole program was stopped, and I never knew why. So, but for a while I was on their badminton team. I probably couldn't, well, I'd fall on my face if I tried that now. All the songs that I really like I have known for a good many years, and I liked them when I was from the time I was a teenager till I was 25 or 30. And now if anybody would hear them, they'd say, "Ugh, what awful music." I liked swing, and my Mom and Dad thought that was the worst thing in the world. But I think that every generation has got a different taste in music, and if it involves a mom and dad, they don't like what you like. In fact, there was a time when I thought the Beatles were awful, but now I hear some of their songs and I think they've got nothing on what I hear today. My first job was in a dime store downtown, and I think it was Woolworths. And for a while I worked at Steccady's downtown, and I sold women's hose. I worked at, I think it was Kresge's, and we had the Shiners in town. I remember my first paycheck. I gave it all to my folks, except a little bit, because when I went to JC, they didn't pay it for me. I had to find a way to get the money to pay my tuition. I wanted to be a history teacher. Never made it. I went to JC, and I had parents that weren't terribly interested in my going on any farther, and I got discouraged and quit. So I went to junior college, but I never went to college. I had a good school years, and let's see, I met MJ at church. MJ is my husband. His name was Martin J. We called it Epworth League. And he was 2 years ahead of me in school, so I wouldn't have known him unless I went to that particular Epworth League thing. And that's how I got acquainted with him. We went to what was called the log cabin. We got a hamburger But there was a kid by the name of Bob Colnott with us. And I think that was the first time we'd ever gone out. I wasn't quite sure whether I wanted to know him or not. So I goofed again. I thought one thing and did the other. Yes, I do remember about Adolf Hitler, and he scared the living daylights out of me because he was a dictator. And when we were in Germany, we went to the Eagle's Nest where he would, and he had a gold elevator or something, and I remember we went up on this very, very plush elevator and went to a room that they called the Eagle's Nest, and they had two kids standing there looking very stern, and all I wanted to do was leave. So we saw the Eagle's Nest, and I never want to see it again. But I can remember one night we were pulling our trailer, and it was kind of late at night, and we saw this airplane going by, and it was all lit up, and it was flying. Had a big flag behind it. It was advertising something. But before we realized it, scared the daylights out of us. And we were glad to get someplace that we thought was safe. I remember very distinctly being in the living room at my mother and father's house when Pearl Harbor was bombed, and I knew immediately who was going to go enlist. And the reason he enlisted was so he could be in the Air Force and not in the regular Army. He wanted to be on B-24s or any airplane. I always told him that airplanes came first and then me. And he agreed with me with a grin on his face. And I can still remember one of my favorite songs in that time was The White Cliffs of Dover. I guess it was a song that kind of hit home, especially for those soldiers that were stationed in England. When he was in the Air Force, I didn't see him for 14 months. He was a waist gunner, and the man next to him got killed. So I was glad he wasn't standing in that guy's place. I used to pick up the paper and see how many B-24s were shot down, and that's what he was on, B-24s. He was stationed in Italy, and he sent me a postcard, told me some cathedral he went to, which was supposed to give me a good idea of what part of Italy he was in, but it went right over my head. My mother called me at JC or someplace anyway, and she said, packages arrived for you. So I cut class and I went home to see what kind of a package I got, and it was my engagement ring. So romantic. He was in Alabama and I was in Michigan, so that's the way we got engaged. We were married in 1943, I guess. Our reception was downstairs in the so-called basement. We bought the house just as soon as MJ got out of the Air Force. And so we had to wait for it to be built, and in the meantime we stayed at Mom and Dad's house. We looked for an apartment, and I went and knocked on the door because I saw an empty windows. So I walked up and asked if they had a house or an apartment they would rent. And she said, "No, dear, I'm just washing the curtains." So we never did live any place except with Mom and Dad until the house was built, and then we eagerly moved into it. We bought all new furniture. I think your great-grandpa would have said, I have bought more cars now that cost more than that house. It was $7,300 for a brand new house. The builder would not let us make any changes, and I said, can't we even have a shower head in the bathroom? Nope, take it or leave it. So we took it. When MJ got out of the service, he came home and he said, I am going to be the breadwinner in the family. You will not work outside the home. And that's the way it was. In our first house, I had to make sure that the front doorknob was always polished because he didn't want to have a house that had a grungy doorknob, I guess. But so I had to keep the doorknob shiny. As I think about it, there were a lot of things that I would do different now. I would go tell them to take a jump in the lake, probably. Wouldn't polish any doorknob for anybody now. Tell them if they want it polished to go ahead and polish it. Well, at any rate, it all worked out for the best. I went into the doctor's one time and she said, where does your husband work? And I said, FAA. And she said, oh, Future Farmers of America. And I said, no, FAA. We were in Boise, Idaho, and I was sewing a patch on MJ's uniform. And the bed was jiggling. I was sitting on the edge of the bed putting this patch on his uniform. And I got so irritated, I said, quit jiggling the bed. And all of a sudden, somebody downstairs said, earthquake. And so that was the first time and the last time I was in an earthquake. And it was a very mild one. There was no damage except the pictures got kind of cockeyed on the walls, but there was no damage. It was a very, very mild one. I wanted to learn how to ski, and your dad said, your great-grandpa said, no, I am not going to learn how to ski. So I thought it was a real victory when I asked him if he'd like to take square dancing lessons, and he was all for that. So we had some nice experiences with square dancing, and we went to some square dance conventions. We went to a dance at the Civic Auditorium, and one of the people in the band came down and tapped me on the shoulder and wanted to know if I wanted to dance, and I said no. So he went away with I'm sorry I asked her. Oh, that's the Long Branch Saloon in Dodge City, Kansas. And sometimes they just posed for pictures, but when you went into the Long Branch, you ordered sarsaparilla. I don't think they had anything but that. And one time, Art and Elizabeth was MJ's sister, and Art was a chemistry teacher in high school, and we maneuvered so he had to sit on the aisle, and we were at the Long Branch Saloon, and Miss Kitty came and sat on his lap and sung to him, and so we took pictures, and I threatened to put it in the high school yearbook, and I thought his oldest daughter was going to have a fit. And she said, you can't do that. And I said, just watch me. But I wasn't going to do it anyway. I was just threatening. But they sure did get all bent out of shape. Gary is my son, and Sari is my daughter-in-law. And we named him Gary so nobody could nickname him. And now when I talk to him on the telephone, they call each other Gare and Sarah. First time I ever flew anyplace, I was in a little Cessna. And we went to visit some people that MJ knew in the service. He wanted me to take control because he said, if something would happen to me, how would you land this airplane? And all I could think of is we'd crash, because I didn't have a light enough hands. I was wobbling all over the sky. And I said, it's all yours, and don't ever ask me to do it again. When he first was in FAA, they believed in moving people every 5 years. And they finally decided that moving people every 5 years was getting expensive. So they left us to the place I liked the least for 15 years. That was Ypsilanti. I don't know why I didn't like Ypsi. I think it was because they used to have what they called cancer coffees. A lady came up to me and puffed herself up and said, I am old Ypsilanti. And I had to stop from saying, well, la-di-da. My maiden name was Brown. It's a very simple name. But when we went to the church in Ypsilanti, Michigan, there was a pastor there whose name was Brown. And he informed me one day that he was a higher class Brown than I was because he had an E on his name and I didn't. So he was not my favorite pastor. I was kind of glad when he left. But of course he left because his wife divorced him and she stayed in Ypsilanti and he went back to, I don't know, Mississippi or Alabama or someplace. Mostly they were good memories, so I don't know why I disliked Ypsi so much. Maybe it was all that lady that was old Ypsilanti. And they were very proud of being old Ypsilanti, believe me. With all the moves that MJ got with FAA, I think I've moved about 30 times. That's a lot of moving. We were right across from the hospital, and we could hear people in the maternity ward, women screaming. And I decided right then and there I was never going to have kids. My kids were, of course, perfect. When Terry was in a baby, we were driving a terraplane, which is no longer around with good reason. But anyway, we would put her basket between us on the front seat. And so when we gave that, my dad said we could have the terraplane so we'd have a car. And MJ said, no, it's your car, we're going to give it back to you. And so we bought a used car, and on the way home, the guy had his right turn blinker on, only he turned left, and so before we ever got our car home, we had a bent fender. My least favorite car was the Packard. I did not like that Packard at all. And it was the ugliest car, and it was one of those that did not have a full metal roof. And so when it would rain, the back seat would get wet. And then when it got really cold, the back seat froze. They didn't come in cars then, but he had access to airplane seat belts, and so he put them in the car for the kids, but I don't remember when he did it. All I know is they were in seat belts when no other kids were. We were up in the balcony, and there was a lady by the name of Mrs. Smith, and she had a soprano voice which kind of hurt your ears. And so we were sitting in the front row of the balcony, and it was the last time we ever sat in the front row because Mrs. Smith started to sing, and she leaned over the balcony and went like this. So after that, we sat in the second row. That's when Gary got kind of pushed into taking dancing lessons because the girl downstairs decided that she she wanted to pick her own partner is what it was. So she picked Gary for a partner. So he took dancing lessons while we were in Springfield, Illinois. We lived in Fargo, but not for very long. He built an airplane at one point, but Terry wanted to him drink tea with her doll set, and so she thought he was playing with her, and he was just doing what she wanted to get rid of her. He would put signs on the door, enter at your own risk, and he would turn all of her animals upside down on her bed, so she had to straighten them all up. But I don't know why, but she had a pencil sharpener in her room, but it was an electric pencil sharpener, and Gary didn't have one, so he would go in there to sharpen pencils. And while he was there, he'd turn the animals upside down and all kinds of stuff. And with your mother, I threatened her that if she didn't pick up the stuff in her bedroom, I was going to throw it away. So she ignored it. So she came home from school one time, and I had packed up everything on her floor, including some of her homework. And I put it in a sack, and I put it in our closet. And she got home, and her room was all clean. So I had threatened her that I was going to just throw it out. So she thought I threw it out, but it was all in a paper sack in our bedroom. So I let her sweat for a little while, and then I got it out, and I said, next time this happens, it's going to be thrown away for good. And darned if she didn't believe me. I had good kids. I think my favorite memory was one year Gary wanted a drum set, and we finally gave in and bought him a drum set. He used it once and then ignored it. That was not money well spent. So when he wanted a fishing rod, and I said, what in the world will you do with a fishing rod? Well, he's going fishing. So he said, okay, but you have to save your money and buy it, at least half of it. And darned if the kid didn't save enough money, so he bought a fishing rod, which he never ever used. And I knew he wouldn't, because his father did not like to go fishing. I was horrified that somebody would actually shoot Kennedy. I was glad they knew who it was and finally caught him, arrested him. But then somebody shot him, so we were setting up for a bazaar. So that kind of squashed the decorating we were doing. I was very interested. I couldn't understand why people would be brave enough to want to walk on the moon. It was the last place I'd want to be. I guess I was never very brave. He always said he was going to see, what was it, Dr. Adams that lived next door to them? Somebody in the chemistry department at Eastern. And he always said he had to go see him, but we knew he was going to see Sari. And we could always tell when he was coming home because we'd hear the door close. They lived right around the corner from us. And one night it slammed, and I said, you and Sari have a fight? No. Why would you ask us that? I can't say that my stint in either North or South Dakota was one that I was wild about. We traveled whenever we could. I think one of our memorable trips was when we went to Europe, and we went there because Gary and Sari wanted to make sure that Suzanne, who was quite young, never forgot that she had grandparents. Every time we stepped out of the door, she said, do you have your passport? And of course we had it with us all the time. because, and we went for a walk one day, and the first thing Sari says, "Do you have your passport?" So they asked us to come, and we stayed a month with them. And by that time, we were ready to come home, believe me. But they said, well, as long as you're going to be here, why don't you take a tour? And see as how we never expected to go to Europe. We didn't think anything about a tour, but we saw seven European countries. And just about the time we'd get used to one currency, we'd move to something else and have to get used to another currency. One time we were on a bus just sightseeing, but we had to be back to the bus at a certain time, and we couldn't find the bus. And all of a sudden I spotted it, and they were just about to leave us there. And if they had left us there, we would have had to find the United States Embassy and tell them what happened, and they would have made connections so we'd be back on the tour. But all of a sudden I spotted the bus that we were supposed to take, so that was fortunate. We got on the bus just as it was going to leave. They weren't going to wait any longer for us. We told Gary and Sarah we'd take care of Suzanne one time, and so they could have a night out. But they were so worried about us knowing where our passports were that they didn't stay out very long. They came home before, you know what. So, but we had a good time. We learned a lot. I let somebody else handle the currency. And I know that one time Suzanne wanted to take a carriage ride, and Gary said no. Well, I wanted to take a carriage ride too. So I talked MJ into paying for everybody, and we had a carriage ride. And I think we made Gary and Sarah very angry right then. But MJ was interested in the methods they were using in building houses. And one night, some friends of theirs invited us over for a wine tasting party. And I said, no wonder you wanted to move. You know how much wine you drank? So they said, yeah, we knew what we were doing. We knew that they were going to introduce us to all kinds of new wines that they had in Germany. And I thought, I wish I liked this stuff. So people were very friendly, and you could spot a tourist a mile away. No matter how you dressed, if you tried to dress like the people there was something about being a tourist. They knew exactly what you were. I was born in Grand Rapids, and I lived most of my life in Grand Rapids. It's still home to me. It's probably my favorite place, but it was home to begin with. So some of the places we were in were really very interesting historically, and I didn't appreciate it as much then as I probably should have. Oh, this is the Corn Palace. Everything was made out of corn. Not the building, just the decorations. But we saw a show while we were there. That I do know. I don't know what I would say about my grandkids. I always thought they were perfect, of course. Now I know better. I was taking Jen to get some material because she was taking sewing in middle school or junior high or whatever they call it then. And there was a man driving in front of me. I think he was drunk as a skunk because he couldn't figure out which lane he was going to be in. And I said, Jumping Jehoshaphat, make up your mind. And Jen thought I was swearing. She was most upset with me. But we got her material and she made them, and she did a good job of sewing, but she told somebody that she made something and they made fun of her and she never sewed anything again. Kids are cruel. And I think we got our first computer, we paid $25 for it, and who was it? Jeff, I guess, made a library on it first thing, and he did a great job, and we were just learning how to use it. In fact, MJ would try to play a game where he was flying an airplane. He could fly an airplane, but not on that computer. He kept crashing. It was freestanding, and we had it downstairs in the family room, and the thing we used it most for was playing games. We didn't use it even the way I use my iPad today. We just didn't know how to do it. We went to the Indianapolis 500. We had some friends that lived in Indiana, and we went down there, and these were the time trials. This wasn't the real race, but we were down there one time, and we were on the edge of a tornado, and the guys were swimming. It rained so hard that they were making believe they were swimming in the roadway, and chairs were flying down over our heads. And that was the time when we were down there that Terry went screaming through she went running through the bedroom or kitchen or something rather. And anyway, they had a crawl space under their house, and MJ and Ray, who was a friend of his, went down in the crawl space, and they forgot to put the thing back on. So Terry came running out of the bedroom and fell down in the crawl space, got a black eye, and then on the way home she walked into a glass door because she thought it was open and got another black eye. So we got home, and I put a bonnet on her just because it shielded her face. She had 2 black eyes, and we crossed the street downtown, and one of the policemen that was directing traffic looked at her, and I think he thought she was an abused child. And I wanted to say, no, she just ran into a door and fell in a hole. You know, you live in a place like this, and you forget what life used to be like for you. But after a while, you get used to it. My great-grandkids are good kids, and I am amazed at the things that they can do now that I wouldn't have been able to do, and now they're perfectly commonplace. But as far as great-grandkids go, they're absolutely perfect. We've had some experiences, but I think everybody that goes through life has some experiences, and some of them are good and some of them not so good. Everybody has a story to tell. And if you stop and think about it, if you don't wait too long so your memory's not so good, you'd be okay.
There'll be bluebirds over the white cliffs of Dover tomorrow. Just you wait and see. There'll be love and laughter and peace Just you wait.